Oh, hello again everyone, here we are inside the Welsh Spitfire Museum. We're in Haverfordwest and this is I think a little gem that I wanted to show you because it's a small museum given over to the Supermarine Spitfire, and the entrance of it is actually guarded by this gentleman here who's in the uniform of a navigator. You can see that by the N on his wing there. He's very cool because he's got his sunglasses on. Well, good for him. You can see he's a flight sergeant as well. So there we are. Right, so let's move on, shall we? And we'll just walk on down here. There's you see some photograph pictures of the old posters, people being asked to take their place for the war effort and so on. And Britain needs you, and that's from the First World War more, I would suggest. And be not wasteful, and you know how everybody's helping and so on. So we'll move more into the more relevant stuff here. There is some noise in the background, which is a video that's on running all at the time. But for the modelers amongst you, there'll be some things that interest you here. But before that, you can see some munitions, and there are cannon cartridges there at the back, and you can see those. Hopefully you can see those okay. Just zero in on them a little bit and bring that out again. These linked rounds are in fact blank rounds. You can see that because of the crimped tops and those shells on top of them. I suspect that you probably wouldn't be allowed to show any sort of round publicly that had a shell on the top of it. Oh, hang on a minute. Yes, of course you would. What an idiot I am. But you can see some of the rounds that might have been used in a Browning 303. As we move along here, there's models of all kinds here. You can see there's an awful lot of work that's gone into this. There's all sorts of different aircraft, Hurricanes and small Lancasters. There's a Spitfire MkVIII there. There's a Bristol Blenheim, there's a later Hurricane fitted with cannons there. All sorts of different things, an awful lot of work, as I said. There's a P-51D Mustang right down at the bottom there. Then we move across into some aircraft, some German aircraft from the Second World War. I can recognise a Junkers Ju-8 or Junkers Ju-88 dive bomber there, but the rest of them, I'm afraid, are a little beyond me. But you, I've no doubt, will all know these, and I'll give you a quick look at these. And there's all interesting. There's some interesting work on that aircraft there, that Junkers tank killer. That's oh sorry, it's a Stuka, isn't it? Yes, Ju-87. It says there because I can read, as we all can. So there we go. But let's move along anyway and take a look. So what we're here to see is a Spitfire set of components and so on and so forth. This is carburettor from a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, as you can see, it's rather large. You probably wouldn't fit that into your mini moke, would you? Let's face it. Moving along around the corner here, we can see the back end of the Merlin engine, which is the supercharger. You can see there it's a two-stage supercharger fitted to the late Mark Spitfires, that is, again, as you can see, it's a very substantial piece of kit there. You can see on board here as well, obviously, there's the Rolls-Royce marking. There's also numbering as well, so the numbering will allow you to be able to trace the aircraft component right the way back to its initial production, so that quality can be established very easily. There's a number on the, go back to the carburettor, there's one on that as well. So this is an SU carburettor. That will mean more to some people than it will, I'm afraid, to me, but there we are. So moving along here, we've got some instruments here. You can see a temperature gauge there. It's hard to see because it's backlit, and I can't light from the front, so that's one of the vertical temperature gauges that sits on the right hand side of the instrument panel, slightly about 2/3 of the way down on the right, just to the right of the blind flying controls. We'll come to them in a minute. So down here we can see an altimeter. I think that's a gyro, that's a compass there. It's not a gyro compass as such, but there we are. There's aircraft radios. There's that's a compass there. So let's have a quick look at that. You may be able to see this. Hopefully you can. Typically on a Spitfire instrument panel, this type of compass would be fitted underneath the instrument panel. It's that bit that you don't like to fit, I think, and it's hard to paint. And there's another example there, and yet another example there, which is probably better lit. So that's all very interesting here. So here's something that's quite interesting to see. This is a wooden propeller, probably from a Spitfire, I would say. So as we know, Rotol manufactured wooden propellers for certainly late Mark Spitfire aircraft, and the reason for the wooden propeller was that it was easy to produce. It could be produced quite inexpensively, but also if you had a propeller strike on the ground with a wooden propeller, it damaged the engine and the components inside the gearbox and so on much less than say a magnesium alloy propeller or an aluminium one, as were fitted to early Mark. That was my finger there. That's not good, is it? So the early Mark Spitfires with three-bladed propellers were both Rotol and de Havilland. De Havilland was an aluminium, I believe, alloy propeller. A magnesium alloy propeller was Rotol. So we move on here. There are some other little models up here. Perhaps one of the showpieces for this particular exhibition is a Rolls-Royce Merlin, and we can see some of the components laid out and labelled for us. So for example, as you see here, the magnetos, there's one on either side, and we can see the V engine block, the V canting of the block here does give you an opportunity to see just exactly how large this is and establish a scale. You can see the exhaust stubs here. Now, as you'll know, exhaust stubs never rusted because they were made from a specific material that didn't. But you can see those there. So there are 6 on either side, so it's a V12 engine. And the Rolls-Royce name was always stamped on these. So there we go. And then there are tappings off the end of the cams here for various purposes unnamed. I couldn't tell you what they might be. And we move forward here, and this is the propeller stub here, and the propeller gearbox, and you can see on here there's an oil control valve under there. You can see that, and here we have a spinner that's down there. So they're fairly substantial, these things. It would have to be said. And another example of a propeller. See, this one's got a leading edge that's covered in metal, and then the rest of the propeller is wood. This actually is quite relevant now, so I'll try not to put my finger in front of this. Sorry about this. We haven't got Steadicam today because I didn't bring the gimbal, so we have Unsteadicam instead, which is not great. This is a leading edge fuel tank for a Mark VIII Spitfire. So if you've done your research before looking at this, you'll probably know what we're coming to in a minute. And the absolute centrepiece of this, and the gem that I was leading to, is this. This is JG668, which is a Mark VIII Spitfire that was manufactured in 1944. It spent its time at the Vickers Supermarine plant in Southampton, where it was manufactured. It was then moved to be finally assembled up near Birmingham. It was then crated and sent to Australia. And we don't have the engine, so we have the engine bulkhead here. I can't give you the frame number, I can't remember what it is, but normally you would see components placed onto here, and the engine bearers would be coming through. There's one of them here, there's another one here, and as you can see, this is pretty much complete in many details, but what we can do quite uniquely is we can look inside this. Now, this is really quite an amazing experience, if I'm absolutely truthful with you, because I've never even been this close to a Spitfire, let alone looked in one. But today we get the opportunity to do this and to be able to actually see an awful lot of the components that are obscured by bits and pieces that we don't, that are placed in the cockpit, for example. So when we look at the pilot's seat here, so I'm trying to find a place to hold this so that I can gesticulate. So when we see the pilot's seat here, normally immediately behind the pilot's seat there is a 5mm steel sheet which is bulletproof, and there is a further one up here as well, a triangular one that sits in there, and that is also bulletproof, but that contains the pilot's headrest. And then immediately behind that you would see the voltage regulator, which sits into this area here. So the fact that these two components aren't here at this moment in time does allow us to actually have a little look back behind the seat and down to the fuselage. So we can see the frames, the formers, as they go pretty much all the way back to the tail. Now the tail is not on this aircraft, but it will be put on, I would imagine, hopefully before the thing flies, let's face it. But you can see back, and we can count the frames here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames. This is frame 11, and we know that, so frame 11 here is the pilot's seat frame, so that goes all the way back to frame 19 at the back of the aircraft there. And if we turn around here now, we can start to look, and it's a little dark in here, hopefully you'll be able to see this okay. We can start to look at the flying controls. So the instrument panel is here. So some of the things that we can see here are missing, so there's not everything is here. So we'll start on the starboard side and just take a look forwards from there. So I'll outline some of the things that are there and some of the things that I know that are missing. So the first thing we can see here, this is I think the IFF. It was known as pipsqueak, and was a means of identifying the aircraft as being friendly. Just forward of that you can see the spare lamp holders for the reflector gun sight. So this is a Mark II reflector gun sight, as you can see. The giveaway on that one is that the reflector is square, and on Mark 1As, for example, the reflector here is round, and the lamp sits up inside here at the back here. And what you also have is range finding nodules here. Normally the pilots, I gather, in the Second World War set those to 400 yards and left them at that. So you know, you have an easy ranging, and if you knew the aircraft well, which these guys did, then you could judge from there. So let's go back down to the starboard right lower part of the instrument panel here. So I'm actually inside the cockpit now. I'm not sitting in it, by the way. I'm standing outside it and leaning in. So first of all, we can see oil temperature and radiator temperature, and then I think that is a voltage meter there, and then there's an engine RPM gauge here. The temperature gauge on this should have been sat in there, I believe, for oil temperature. There's also a light somewhere around for oil pressure as well, and that's the light that pilots never want to see lit. And then if we move across slightly there, hopefully you can see all this. I'm going to just zero back out just a little bit, just so that you can see what's going on here. Within this area, and this stands proud from the instrument panel, this area here, I'm pointing out here, down to here and there, these are what's called the blind flying controls. So we'll start on the starboard side at the top right hand corner here. You've got a rate of climb and descent indicator, and below that you have what's called the turn and slip indicator, which shows you how much the aircraft slips as it turns. Moving inboard towards the centre here, we have the gyro compass, and then immediately above that you have the artificial horizon. You've got an adjustment gauge for that there. Moving to the port side here, we then have an airspeed indicator, an MPH, and then an altimeter here with its adjustment gauge here, so you can adjust the altimeter, and that, as you can see, still works. And remember, this is not far off 80 years old, this aircraft, so it's done extraordinarily well in that regard. So what things are missing? So If we move back to the starboard side, we should expect to see in this area here the undercarriage lever. The undercarriage lever sits here and has a lever that sticks up about there, and that's in the down position on this side and then the up position on that side. And so we're going to have to imagine that one, ladies and gentlemen, but there we are. Moving to the left and into the centre, we can see the spade grip here. So as you can see, you've got the round, the very familiar round handle here, and the press buttons and rocker switches for changing between cannons and guns. And this bit here is the handbrake. So when you land the aircraft around about 75 miles an hour, you pull that handbrake on like that, and you can see the extent of the movement here. And you can also see the chain there. That would normally be covered by a component to stop it being seen. Just shift back here quickly. This is the engine primer. Because it's a carburettor engine, you would need to prime it, and you would pump that, I think, 5 or 6 times to get that going. You have to be careful not to prime it, not to over prime it to flood the engine. And obviously there's no flaws here, and you can therefore see down here things moving. That's fascinating, that. So if we move down further still and we look at the pedals, so what you can see here are the late mark pedals. They're different from the early mark of pedals, because the early mark pedal, let's just move into look at that side, that's easier to see. The early mark pedal had only 1 footrest, and these later ones had 2 footrests, and the idea of that was to give the pilot more resistance to G, so that you would put your feet on the top marks. There are no straps at the top at this moment in time, but again this aircraft will be restored. So let's move back up again so we can see some further bits and pieces that I can't quite tell you what they are. But this is the undercarriage up and down indicators here. So there's a red for up and a green for down. And when you move the lever to the up position, the hydraulics would catch up with you, and the wheels underneath the aircraft would rise not evenly. One would go first, followed by the next, so that they would thump into their wells, and you would feel that, and then the aircraft would start to behave a little better, so you could see that you would know that the aircraft undercarriage were up. You had to be going at less than 138 miles an hour to get the undercarriage up. If you were going at more than 138 miles an hour, you're likely to damage the undercarriage and damage the aircraft. So a key component here that you can see right in front of you now is the throttle quadrant. You have the throttle lever here. I believe that this is the pitch control. So the Spitfire MkVIII had a 4-blade Rotol propeller, which was variable pitch. So there was coarse pitch for taking off and landing and fine pitch for manoeuvring. And this is how you would move that. I'm not going to move that lever. There's also a variable boost control lever that you could use as well. I don't recall what the little switch here is for, but there we have it. So the inside of a Spitfire cockpit for all you modelers here. The green, I have to say, on this is quite dark. The green on frame 10 here, interestingly, quite light, so much lighter. So when people say that these components were produced by different companies and painted slightly different shades, well, you can see this, and it's very clear to all and sundry. Again, I think this green here is slightly different too, but there we are. So here we have an artifact. This is a piece of history. It sits here at Haverfordwest in Bridge Street in Haverfordwest, and it is intended that this aircraft be restored to flying condition, and when it is, it will be one of only about 70 in the world that can fly. But here in Haverfordwest, you have an opportunity to get up close and personal with a Spitfire MkVIII, and to see it, to touch it, to interact with it, to feel it, not to sit in it. It's very important. You cannot sit in the aircraft, and you can enjoy this. But guess what? To come and do this, you don't have to pay anything at all. I think that's quite amazing, and I'm going to use this opportunity to say to people, look, I'm going to leave a link to the website in the comment, no, not in the comments, in the information section of this video today, and I'm going to say to you, go along and visit it, give them some money, help them to bring this back to flying condition, because I'm fairly sure that they can do it, and we can all learn something about these aircraft, and retain a piece of our history, and see something absolutely marvellous. If I was to see this in the air in my lifetime, I would have the inestimable pleasure of being able to say, I've seen inside that aircraft, and I think that's quite an amazing thing. So there we are. It's a small museum. You can go round it in, well, considerably less than half an hour if you want to. This film currently runs to about just over 21 minutes, and I genuinely hope it's been interesting to you. Whether you're a modeller, whether you're not, whether you're just interested in aircraft, then this is something that I think that people should see, and I certainly will be supporting the Welsh Spitfire Museum, and I'll make a donation in just a minute to them because I think they thoroughly deserve it. This is a brilliant thing to have seen and is hidden away, and to some extent I think it's even more important to give some money to these type of museums, because places like the Imperial War Museum, Duxford and various other places, even the Gloucester Aircraft Museum, get stacks of donations. They probably get some money from government, but these guys essentially manage with very little, to be honest with you, and if we can help them along, then I think that's a marvellous thing. So look, I've missed some of the key details here, there's no question about that. I'm not an expert on these aircraft, but hopefully what you have seen has been exciting for you to look at, and I genuinely hope that you've got something out of this today. If you want to share it, then please share it with whoever you wish. The more people that see this, I think, the better it is. I'll look forward to catching up with you guys, everybody out there in modelling land and in aircraft land, perhaps the next time I visit the modelling desk, and I'll be delighted to have you along. So there we go on this Tuesday morning. This is Inzan signing off. See you later.